I have a couple more comments to make about consciousness. I just recorded those videos about the Chinese room and all that kind of stuff. And I want to clarify some of my personal views. When I say my personal views, I mean the right views on consciousness, right? So I said in the Chinese room experiment video that my belief is if you really take the Chinese room to its logical conclusion, you have to conclude that consciousness is not something material. It's not something that emerges from narrowly the material world. And the argument I made for that is I actually have an article on my website. Maybe it's still a draft, but I have an article on my website where I talk about this, where when you have, there's this old argument by David Hume, okay, right, where he says, no matter what factual statements you can have about the world, you can put them all together, but the is statements about the world never become an ought statement. They never become a moral statement, right? That's David. David obviously is an arch skeptic, right? He wants to deconstruct kind of making moral judgments, and he says, okay, the reality of what is has nothing to do. I mean, it might have something to do, but like you can't take mere facts and thus make moral conclusions. They're kind of two, I don't want to say non-overlapping magisteria. They kind of overlap and they interact, but they're different. You can't take just one and produce one of the others. And my argument for consciousness being something separate from matter is basically analogous. That is, it's not really the same form, but it's something analogous. And what I mean by that is obviously consciousness, as per the Chinese room experiment, is not merely computation. No matter what it is, your definition of what consciousness is cannot just mean a system computing something and consciousness just appears from it. It's just like some kind of illusion tacked on, right? Whatever consciousness is, it's something different. Just because a system is computing language and giving an output does not mean it's conscious of what's going on. Syntax is not semantics. But my argument of consciousness is basically, that being said, the entire universe, the entire materialist universe, that is not involving anything spiritual or anything noetic having to do with the Noose, right? That's a classical word for consciousness. The physical world as it is a giant syntactic playground, right? When I say syntactic playground, I mean there are atoms bumping against each other, there are chemical reactions, there are forces of gravity, allegedly. There are lots of other things going on in the universe. And all of them it is analogous to a giant computational system. It's a giant syntactic system where you have a raw material that is matter, however that is, and you have various forces, and they are acting on each other and interacting in the same way that an AI generating text, or even a simpler computer program generating text, they are just taking the raw material, they are computing it, right? They're doing some kind of computation. It's weird to describe the world as being computation, but the material world it really is that. That's what's going on. It's like a giant computer. If you have this narrowly materialistic view of the world, that's all it is. And if you take that view seriously, and you think about what consciousness is, you have to realize that consciousness is just a different substance. And I don't mean a substance as it's something you can put in a glass. It's like water or something like that. But I mean, it's another force in the universe. It's something that, and again, force, that's like metaphorical speech as well. It's just something that is different from the material world. It clearly interacts with the material world. It interacts at all points in time. But that is not the same thing as to say that it is generated by the material world. And in fact, my argument, again, is analogous to Hume's. Just because you have a lot of is statements, in my case, material computation, physical interaction, all of this kind of stuff, it is never going to produce something that is more than physical. It cannot do that. I mean, I think the example I used on that article I wrote is, imagine you have like a calculator, right? A graphing calculator. Do kids even still have graphing calculators? Do they just do everything on like Google Docs or something? I don't even know. But imagine you have a calculator, right? And you can put any kind of function into that calculator. Obviously, you give it a number, and it will give you some output. Maybe it'll be an undefined function or something like that, but it will give you, as a result, a number, right? Because mathematics has a certain domain that, or range, I guess domain, over which, you know, when you have a mathematical function, it gives you math, right? That is the kind of computation it does. No mathematical function, no matter how complex you make it, is going to give you something that's not a number, okay? You're not going to get a string of English. You're not going to get some physical thing is going to come out of the calculator because you put in a very complex function. I mean, this seems like a totally weird argument for me to even make, but that's kind of the thing you're saying. If you're saying that consciousness it arises from the physical world, okay? It's clearly something very different. It is not something that is physically definable, and I don't just mean it's not definable in science as it is now. I mean the very nature of consciousness, what it actually means to even perceive. It's not the same thing as saying, oh, well, your retina's take in this and it goes to the brain, blah, blah, blah. That is a description of the syntax of the computation of what's happening, interacting with your consciousness, but that is not the same thing as consciousness itself. And I think whatever your interpretation, whatever I guess you believe about the universe, right? And again, even if you are an atheist or something like that, I'm not even saying you can't believe that, but what I am saying is you have to say consciousness is just something different from the other forces in the universe. And obviously people are very afraid, you know, due to Occam's razor, or at least some like weirdly understood idea of Occam's razor, they have this idea that, oh, no, I don't want to believe in metaphysics, I don't want to believe in spiritualist crap, I don't want to believe in any of that, I just want like material forces and matter, and I just believe the universe, it's probably, everything can be explained in those terms, yada, yada, yada. Now, I think the argument that I've made in some blog posts about that is a total misunderstanding about even what I guess the mainstream scientific theories of the world are actually really like. That is, it's not as if like, oh, we just have we have one type of matter, we have one type of force, and they interact in the universe. Actually, no, we have a plethora of non-reducible forces, whether it's gravity or nuclear forces or all these kind of things happening in the universe, and different types of matter. We don't have atoms, you know, like that's another thing that's important to remember. We don't have, in the realm of Democritus, like we don't actually have an irreducible, undividable, like atomic entity, right? That is homogeneous. We don't have that. We have these things we call atoms, but you can actually divide them even more. It's totally different from what Democritus thought. And of course, you can divide those further and further and further. Either way, I bring this up to saying something like consciousness is something distinct from matter, or it's something that might interact with matter, but it's just a different substance in the universe. This is no more radical than saying there are different forces, and there's gravity and there's nuclear forces. It's nothing any more radical than that. The only thing that is kind of, I don't know, frightening or whatever to people is this idea that, I don't know, it just seems like it's hard to do, let's say, experiments with consciousness. Therefore, I don't want to believe, it's scary in science. You know, I don't, it's just something that I don't really understand. It doesn't seem to work like everything else. But I think you honestly just have to kind of end up believing that. I mean, it's just kind of how it is. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but it's hard to even explain, I guess, what I'm getting at. I hope this makes any kind of sense. But my point is, the universe is like a graphing calculator. It is just a computational machine. And it is very clear to us that we have something in the universe, consciousness, which is not the result of computation. Now, there are computations in your brain, there's recursion in your brain, there's all this stuff going on that interacts with consciousness. But that is not the same. Saying that consciousness is recursive has nothing to do with actually saying that consciousness is, there's something going on. You can feel it. It is not just like a subroutine that is referring to itself. That might be part of what it is, but that is not the essence of what consciousness is. That is not what Noose is, right? In a lot of medieval thought and kind of earlier like classical thought, you know, there's this idea of like Noose or consciousness. Obviously, you know, in Orthodox Christianity, it's a concept. It's one of the most important concepts that kind of separates us from, I guess, you know, post, you know, in the Latin-speaking West, you know, they kind of took this concept of Nous. They'll variously translate it as sensus, which really becomes like sensory input, honestly, as time goes on. It's kind of misunderstood. But I think people in antiquity were much more likely to say what I'm saying now. And obviously people will talk about Indian, Hindu, whatever, a bunch of stuff they believe about consciousness. But there is this again, this isn't like, it's not like you're just believing whatever, but I mean, there's a metaphor that, consciousness is something like mercury, right? So mercury, alchemists and people like this, they really love mercury because mercury obviously is liquid at room temperature. And it's not just liquid, it's like reflective. It's kind of cool. There's something nice about it. And there's this metaphor that consciousness is kind of like, however it actually works, it's something similar to mercury, right? Where you can put it in a vessel, right? A vessel of any shape, and that consciousness is going to fill the shape however it is. In the same way, your consciousness is affected by your physical body, obviously. If you feel in a certain way depending on your consciousness being in it, right? I think where I was mistaken when I was younger, and I remember actually teaching some of my first classes, and I made this like kind of fallacious argument for, I guess, a narrowly materialistic view of the world, where I would say things like, well, we know that the physical world affects consciousness. You bump your head and you go unconscious. You take a drug, your consciousness changes. Therefore, it must be something physical. And that's nonsense. It can be a totally different substance. Just because it interacts with the physical world doesn't mean, just because gravity and nuclear forces interact doesn't mean that they're the same thing, even if they could be theoretically reducible to the same thing. I don't trust all these science things. Either way, that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not endorsing this stuff that's just like inane paranormalism. I'm not saying anything weird with this. I'm merely saying that consciousness kind of has to be something a little different. It has to be something a little different. And I think when you open the possibility there open, you realize, well, you're not really losing anything. It's not like there's any materialistic explanation of consciousness. Instead, also the thing about mercury, there's something like, again, it reflecting. There is such a deep metaphor there. You pour it in a vessel, and it is reflecting what it sees. There's something, I don't know, there's something cute about it. You understand why people like this little metaphor, this little way of, they really, again, these like early chemists and alchemists, they really had this kind of funny way of, I don't know, it's just something charming way of looking at the world. Either way, that's my argument. It's not very coherent. I apologize, but hopefully it makes sense to at least like 3 or 4 of you guys.